We'll make it greener, we'll make it cleaner.
Here we are in Utrecht at both ends. Another edition of The Future We See, and this time about food systems. How do we get a more sustainable and just food system and agriculture system? Many questions, many inspirational topics. Let's see what happens.
So we took the initiative this year to organize free dialogues, especially for students here in Utrecht, but also others, to talk about the future we see. Because we really feel, in these uncertain times, there's a climate crisis, food and energy crisis, growing inequalities, that we really need inspiration. We need alternative visions. We need to have a dialogue about a truly sustainable and inclusive future world. And this is not a dream, but this is something that we can really see, the future we see, as this is already happening. A lot of practices are already there, already visions are out there.
A pleasure to be here, and it's nice to see that Both Hands has a tradition in organizing things in formal banks. Because years ago, I was also hosting some sessions for Both Hands in The Hague in a formal bank. So there's something going on here. It's great to spend the coming 1.5 hours with you when it comes to what kind of just and sustainable food system are we looking for? How can we create it? How is it being created? And how can be it facilitated more and more often impactful globally in the Netherlands and in Kenya? Let's start with why is it important that we have a discussion about transforming our food system? Ida, if I can give you the floor, what's the main reason why we should make a transition?
Our current food system has actually produced a triple burden of malnutrition. That's quite complex language, but it means that it overfeeds a part of our population in terms of calories, but then there's a lot of our population that doesn't receive enough nutrients. Then there's people that don't receive enough of either. And there's a huge group of people, I already said that receive too many calories, right? Yep. Dietary-related diseases and obesity are huge problems. And actually around the world, not just in places like Northern Europe or America. And that's really based on a diet that is rooted in ecologically devastating farming methods. So that farming methods that are very heavy in chemical and artificial inputs. And then we're talking about artificial fertilizers, we're talking about pesticides, and all of these things produce a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. Our food system is responsible for 1/3 of our global greenhouse gas emissions. It's also responsible for a lot of soil degradation, a lot of pollution of our soils and our waterways. And again, it's not actually serving us. Our food security globally is going down. So as we see this huge progress and development in agriculture, supposedly owing to the Green Revolution, we're actually not feeding more people.
Matt, if you have to make your elevator pitch on why have this discussion about the transition of our food systems, where do you start?
The Green Revolution and this idea of productivism has been spread worldwide by our development agencies, by our agribusiness corporations, and it has led to this unsustainable industrial food system that is continuing to poison people on the planet. And I think one of the things that we need to think about is who is profiting from the system. Today, if we look at our global seed markets, commercial seed markets, you have 2 companies that control 40% of those seed markets. If we talk about global grain markets.
And these companies, where are they based? What company?
Well, they're now based, one of them, for example, is based in Germany, Bayer and Monsanto.
Bayer,
you have others based in China. Mm-hmm. You also have 4 companies that control between 70 to 90% of global grain trade. And so this is a system that has been very profitable for some, and we need to think about where does this industrial food system come from. And it comes from an ideology of productivism that is rooted in a settler colonial mindset. And so when we're talking about the problem, I think and the solutions, we need to think about, okay, how do we move past this productive system? How do we think about a food system that nourishes people, that is based on care, and that is based on justice? And that is one that is very different from the system we have now.
John, when it comes to your perspective and your practice, where do you start?
Yes, well, what can I add to what those people said? But from the point of view from the farmer, the past 70 years, let's say, it didn't tribute to the advantages of the farmer, because I think the past 70 years the number of farmers decimated. So it was not the system is not of advantage for the farmers. So that's one thing. The other thing is that the current industrial system of farming is depending very much on fossil fuels by using fertilizer, concentrate and chemics. It's unhealthy and it costs a lot of fossil fuel. So my farm produces food on natural systems. Our input is almost zero. So we only use natural resources, and that's the way of producing food in the future, I think. And when you look in the supermarket at this moment, a colleague, a friend of mine, Imke de Boer, she's a professor in Wageningen, and she told that 80% of the current food is not fitting in what we in Holland say the schijf van 5. And I think that's pretty alarming when most of the food in the supermarket is not healthy and a tribute to our health.
No, quite the opposite even, probably.
Exactly.
Yeah. Rosinah.
Thank you so much, and greetings from Kenya. In Kenya, we have over 70 to 80% of the farming community being from the smallholder farmers. So we have to empower them. We have to have a trade which looks at the issues that the smallholder farmers are handling. A food system should actually be informed by relying on or strengthening the biological inputs and empowering farmers to adopt their own agroecological inputs while ensuring that indigenous knowledge is also well taken care of.
Yeah, thank you, Rosinah. And when it comes to the level playing field in Kenya, could you give us a small illustration, a short illustration for us, how this level playing field is present or not present due to how the system currently works, and then later on we will discuss how it should be working.
A lot of concentration is on a few companies who are at the expense of farmers or the rights of farmers, and this has also caused a lot of trouble here in Kenya. And I mean, there is a lot of future and hope because farmers, yes, they have realized that they can do their own, for example, they can manage by doing their own farmer managed seeds, they can save their seeds, they can do their own biological inputs, and most importantly is the importance of safe food, because that is the food that is not only caring for the people's diet, but also caring for the environment. But if you look even globally at the climate crisis discussion, less attention is given to agriculture, particularly even to agroecology, which is also part of the solution. And last year, I saw the report from that was done by the Global Food Future, and it was alarming to show that in the climate funding, like 3% goes to agriculture, and even worrying is how much of it goes even to agroecology. So these are issues that need to be addressed. If we have to move the food systems ahead, we have to think globally, we have to look at issues that solve the food systems once and for all, and food systems that are actually giving back the power to people and not making us dependent on certain companies or certain policies or processes that don't disempower farmers.
Yeah.
And one of the things that is actually interesting is that the Green Revolution is getting a bad rap because people realize that this Green Revolution has not only failed to actually feed people, but is also really benefiting these large corporations like seed corporations. So what you just explained to us is that you're having these powerful actors promoting laws that create opportunities for these seed companies to come in and remove, as Rosinah was talking about, farmer-managed seed systems and replace them with commercial inputs. That who do they benefit? Well, they benefit these corporations. So actually, the Alliance for a Green Revolution Africa changed its name. It's now just AGRA. We're supposed to forget that it actually stands for the Green Revolution.
That's smart marketing.
But this is something that continues, and we are seeing an acceleration of the corporate agenda, especially in the context of climate change, where these corporations are now branding themselves climate smart. And it's, of course, productivism is something that was developed in the agricultural context, which is what we're talking about, but it also is true for our economy more broadly. The idea that we constantly need to grow. And that growth is based on exploitation and extraction. And so those are things that we need to think about, especially if we're going to be thinking about how to transform our agricultural systems, because it's not just an individual or a national problem, it's a global problem, because when we grow too much food, we have to seek out markets for that food. And that means creating trade laws that are predatory and, allow us to dump some foods onto communities that then are no longer able to be self-sufficient. So I think you're right. In order to think about this, we can't just think about it only in our food systems. We have to think about it as a paradigm that is across our economies, and we need to be thinking about it in a global way.
This is the second thing we want to discuss. What's the new paradigm? What are the values of a food system which is inclusive, which is sustainable?
First of all, food has to be healthy, of course, but
Yeah.
I think we have to treat food just like we have to treat. We don't do that at this very moment, but like, for example, healthcare or public transport. It's some of the main rights for the society.
What would the two main values would be for you?
I guess I would say commons and care.
Okay.
The idea of commons is fundamentally challenging the commodity logic. And one of the biggest problems is that we see our food, not we, I shouldn't use, especially in the global north and in this productivist ideology, we are trained to see food as something that we just treat like a commodity, something that we buy and sell, something that we have in trade agreements through markets. So when we start to think about food as a common good, that means really transforming the way that we're thinking about, how we are eating, as well as how we're producing it, and what kinds of systems we need to nourish those systems, to nourish that kind of food system.
Yeah, and you mean also the community of the word commons, right? Like it's a communal part of what we are and what we do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, I think that gets to something that Rosinah was talking about with PELUM. PELUM is sharing knowledge among communities. That's sharing our knowledge, it's sharing our foods, and it's creating infrastructures to facilitate that kind of sharing.
If you have to name one or two values like Matt and John have been saying when it comes to what do we expect from a sustainable and just food system, what were these two for you then?
Yeah, one of them is connectivity. And for me, I'm looking at the food system being part of the solution of the climate crisis, because for a long time we have been, and research shows that industrial agriculture is contributing a lot to to climate crisis. And at the end of the day, we have to eat, whether it's contributing to climate change or not. So it has now to transform and be part of the solution, because there's a way the agriculture can transform so that it doesn't continue making the climate worse and worse. And this is the future I see for all African farmers. I see farmers who are resilient, farmers who are empowered, and farmers who are contributing to a healthy planet, and more importantly, to healthy, nutritious diets.
Okay, that's interesting. Ida, Rosina's already mentioning the youth and the energy of youth, but what other values are for you important if we talk about the just and sustainable food system?
When we talk about restructuring our food system or changing our food system, we talk about distributive justice a lot, right? But the other side of the conversation is contributive justice. How do we make sure that all people get a say in our food systems? How do we democratize our food systems? And how do we make sure that we bring power back to the people, as Rosinah was also saying in the beginning? And that's really a story of diversity, revaluing diversity. The current system as is it isn't broken. It was designed that way, right? It's designed to really facilitate concentration of power and capital, and to serve a very small set of corporate actors and also governmental actors, let's be honest, as Matt has described. And so in order to counter that, we have to really give up this notion that there will be one solution for the entire world population and for all of our different ecosystems and all of the biodiversity in the world. That's not going to work, right? We need to realize that the power of resilience lies, again, in diversity. Biodiversity, but also diversity of food cultures. And that means giving more people a say and giving more people the means to contribute. And I mean from the producer level, but also from a distributive standpoint. So really making sure that we all really get to determine what our food systems look like, instead of a small set of corporate actors.
I was 5 years a conventional farmer, and now over 30 years I'm an organic farmer. And I studied it for 38 years, and I have seen with my own eyes what nature is capable of, and that's that's so much more efficient than what you reach with chemics and fertilizer and concentrate.
So we try to find values of this food system that we're looking for now. How do we get there? Ida, if let's start with what should we stop doing now?
What we should stop is, first of all, our super harmful subsidies. And our Ministry of Agriculture has published a report recently in which they state themselves, and it's based on very thorough research, that 1/3 of all of their subsidies are harmful. So they're harmful to biodiversity, but also from a lot of human rights-based angles, they're harmful. That needs to stop. And when we talk about the A12 protests, when we talk about fossil subsidies, there's a very clear link with our agricultural industry because, as Sean has explained, our current industrial model is fed by artificial fertilizer and chemical pesticides, and those are directly reliant on fossil fuels and produce a lot of greenhouse gas emissions in the process. When we have those regulations in place for Europe, we shouldn't be exporting things that are illegal here to other countries. That's really a deeply neo-colonial practice that we have. An example is there's different types of pesticides that we are still exporting to Latin America and to Africa, neonicotinoids. So these are, this is a type of pesticide where you coat a seed with a pesticide. So when it grows, it absorbs this pesticide, but actually it doesn't absorb it completely. The rest just flows into the natural environment of the plant. So this is illegal in Europe, but we're still exporting it. The Netherlands is actually the 5th biggest exporter of pesticides worldwide. We should be deeply ashamed, and this should change immediately.
Okay, these things we should be stopping now if it comes to you. Rosinah, may I ask you, from your perspective, what should we stop doing? And then we go to the more inspirational part later on.
We also have to support policies, that counter the action or that promote some of these safe practices, policies that are enabling, or the policies that give power to the people, policies that make our food system more independent, and not dependent on certain areas. And also, we have also to stop this push for seeds that are potentially GMO or others which are being pushed in various countries in the name of hybrid, and eventually they have also GMO. So we have to stop these kind of inputs so that we enable farmers to practice their own indigenous practices and also be able to save their own seeds and be part of the solution.
Matt, when it comes to what should we stop doing?
We need to create opportunities for true democracy. And that means empowering people and to listening to social movements that for the past 30 years have been mobilizing and demanding food sovereignty.
John, lastly, before we close this list and then we go into what should we stop doing?
It's of course a matter of taxing and rewarding, and we have to stop rewarding the fossil input of agriculture at this moment.
I think the other thing that we need to think about is, when we're talking about values, we often hear innovation as being the supreme value for solving problems. Of course we need technologies, we need to have creative solutions to problems, but this idea of technological fixes to all of these social problems, we need to start with the social problems first and then think about how to solve them from there.
Okay. And now about what should we start facilitating? We've been discussing already a bit about that when it comes to the democratic part, the nutrition part, the healthy part, but Ida, maybe you want to take it away when it comes to 1 or 2 things we already are seeing, you're doing yourself to make sure that we get a just and sustainable food system.
Peasants and indigenous peoples have been protecting their land and have been protecting sustainable and just ways of agriculture for decades, if not centuries in some places, right? Currently, 80% of all remaining biodiversity is protected on 20% of our land, but only 4% of our world population, and that's being done by indigenous peoples. So just really point that out.
There the connection was never broken.
Exactly, and that's a connection that we have to find again. And I think young people are really the key to finding that link again. Young people should really be educated formally and informally in sustainable food waste, and should be given opportunities to contribute, again, coming back to contributive justice, to contribute to sustainable food waste. And I'm not saying every young person should be farming, part of the week, but I feel like every young person should really reclaim their right to food. But when I think about our educational system, I think about a very strict system, where people kind of seated like you are right now, and maybe not really making the connection. I feel like education for young people should be an embodiment of knowledge and should be learned in community. So I think bringing young people onto land and giving them access to land is really, really vital.
Okay, thanks. John, would you like to add?
Yeah, after World War II, we had the last year of World War II was the hunger winter, and after that, the first European Commissioner of Agriculture was Sigel Mansholt, and he changed the farmers into the current intensive system, and it happened with an awful lot of protests. In 1970, even a farmer died in Brussels because of the protests. That farmers were pushed into the intensive system. Now we have last years we saw a lot of protests from the farmers because we want to get them out of that system. So we can conclude that change is a big problem.
Yeah.
And
change as such. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So don't expect too much that informing farmers about change. It has to be done by rewarding and taxing. Actually, what we have to do is very simple. We have to change the system we are in now is due to political decisions. That industrial food is cheap and healthy food is expensive, and we have to turn it around. I know that some parties will protest about that, but I don't feel sorry for them. They find other ways to make money.
Thank you. Rosinah, when it comes to what should we start facilitating, you were mentioning already earlier, power to the people. How do we grab or take the power needed to create the system that you're already working with in Kenya?
Another thing for me is that agriculture, there is no agriculture without culture, and therefore it has also the agriculture has to look really on the culture. It has to look into the traditions, to us to focus on indigenous knowledge and practices. And this has to be formed by the past, but also bringing as I said, the youth to be part of these culture and traditions, because it's about passing knowledge. It's about being together and moving together and making agriculture really work. I think the youth are full of energy. They are innovative, and we need to look at what is it that we can do. And I'm happy today we are talking to a lot of youth who are part of the solution. So we need to be deliberate and engage them, because at the end of the day, we can't leave this agriculture to just the elderly or a certain age group. We have to be all part of the solution, from the tender age of children in school to the youth in colleges, and all of us be part of this transforming the food system and play a role. And finally, for me, I think very importantly is making financial flows to now move from the industrial agriculture, which we know has also gained a lot of attention globally, but now to give also some attention to the sustainable agriculture practices, to this food transformation and food systems, and more particularly to the agroecology that we are all talking about. So,
thank you. Very inspiring indeed. Matt, what's on your list when it comes to facilitating the transformation that we've been discussing this whole afternoon? What are the crucial things we can do as individuals within the system to make sure that it becomes just as sustainable?
It's a big question, but I think fundamentally, we have, for the past 30 years, we have movements that have risen up and developed important ways of thinking about alternatives, and those are rooted around the ideas of food sovereignty and agroecology. These are two connected terms. Food sovereignty is a term that is about people having the fundamental right to control their food systems. Agroecology is a form of agricultural production and food systems that is deeply linked to food sovereignty. I often hear the term, food sovereignty without agroecology is a political slogan, and agroecology without food sovereignty is a technology of production. The two are really hand in hand. And these have been ideas that have been developed by social movements. And so I think one of the things, Rosinah talked about collectivity, and commons is another word.
Yeah.
And one of that requires is being in community, being in commons. And what that means is, yes, it's great to go buy from a CSA, but the next step is to ask those farmers, what do you need to do to actually, for us all to have these CSAs, and how can we mobilize together politically to engage in these larger socio-political transformations? And I would say young people are already leading the fight for climate justice. And I think one of the things that a food systems component adds to that, thinking about it through food systems, is not just about, climate justice as being this, adversarial fight, but is really about actually building a society that we want. And so it is, I think a hopeful way of really making change that is about reconstructing our communities around these values that we've talked about.
Yeah.
When it comes to educating young people who might have been completely, or who are most likely, because most of us are completely alienated from our agricultural system, right? Who have no connection to land, really. Or maybe they did as a child, but we've really been alienated as we went along in our capitalist society, and it's really been pressured out of us. It takes time to reconnect, and not everyone might reconnect in the same way and find themselves contributing to a better food system in the same way. And that's okay, because there's so many different ways to contribute.